Welcome to the Trent English Show. It's Thursday. We are talking today, as we've been talking for a good part of this week, about the Oklahoma State Department of Health, this crazy scandal that took a wild turn just a week ago today, where all of a sudden, after the legislature gave them a $30 million bailout, after they fired basically 200 staff, almost 200 staff, because they actually believed they were running out of money. It turns out they were not running out of money. They had a slush fund, but the same financial tactics, the same bad management combined with just dishonesty that they were using for years, and possibly even, the specter's been raised, possibly even for decades, became so convoluted, so hard to understand, that the agency leaders who were using this system actually got so confused they thought they were running out of money. I mean, this is just the wildest thing. And my point this week has been that this doesn't make it better. Some people are out there saying, well, you know, at least they're not out of money. Well, yes, at least they're not out of money. At least the state has now extra money, $30 million extra dollars, because the bailout never was even spent. I mean, that was more than 6 months ago that the legislature stroked a $30 million check to the Oklahoma State Department of Health, and they never even spent the money, despite the fact that they sort of kind of thought that they were running out. But I've been making the point this week that this is not better, it's worse. And I want to get to something today that applies across Oklahoma government. And a lot of what happened may be a one-off. The antiquated financial system that was put in 1982 that they were still using at the Oklahoma State Department of Health, that is, my understanding is that's unique to the Oklahoma State Department of Health. That's only going on there, and because of that, there are things that happened there, things that they did there, that are much less likely to happen at other state government agencies, like the creation of a real honest-to-goodness slush fund, right? A real honest-to-goodness slush fund, a hidden account, actually a couple of hidden accounts. They were creating these accounts by basically overestimating expenses, and then when expenses would come in less than they estimated, they would take that money and they would sort of pretend like they were paying it out, but they were paying it into a different fund, almost as if it was a refund, but they didn't put it back in the original fund, they put it somewhere else. They also did this with some other kinds of funding where basically they were just skimming bits of money here and there and then hiding it from the legislature, hiding it from the public, hiding it, we have been told, from other executive branch officials, and ultimately, in fact, even hiding it from themselves, apparently. But there is a part of this that applies across Oklahoma government. That's what I want to talk about today, because, I mean, look, if we don't learn anything from this, I mean, we've got people out there in the media, we've got people out there in the executive branch saying, well, you know, shucks, this was a bad thing, and I'm glad we figured it all out, and we can just move on, and nothing more to see here. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Right there. Well, they had a different computer system, and you know, obviously, if you don't have that computer system, none of these bad things are going to happen. Wrong. The fundamental problem with financing at the Oklahoma State Department of Health actually didn't have anything to do. I mean, first of all, we know nobody was stealing the money. I mean, this is one of the big things to take away from all of this, right? You can have all kinds of financial mismanagement and disasters. I mean, even disasters to the point where services are compromised and people lose their jobs. It doesn't take people stealing money. It just takes people being lawless and dishonest for long enough. But we have a system in Oklahoma that helps make that possible, and a system that is not unique to the Oklahoma State Department of Health, and that is a combination of two things. One is fee-based government. Fee-based government, right? You've heard the term off-the-top funds. You've heard about revolving funds. You've heard about one-time money. You've certainly paid a lot of fees, right? You've seen all of this. This impacts you in your daily life. At least a piece of this does. But do you ever think about how this distorts government, how this allows government to be irresponsible, how this actually turns on its head our whole constitutional system? I want to unpack that for us today. The other part of the problem is reliance on federal funds, federal funding, which is actually these are two very similar problems. They might sound very different. Like fees are, fees are these little bits of money that we pay here and there. We get nickeled and dimed by our government at the state and local level. And so you might think, well, yeah, fees, that's one thing. Federal money, that's totally different. We've got these big amounts of money that come in federal grants and federal contracts. Federal government writes checks to agencies. It might seem like totally different things. They both distort and actually destroy small r, Republican government for a similar set of reasons. Here's what happens. The problem is, and the health department shows this, the problem is that in these cases, agencies, especially the way we do it in Oklahoma, frankly, there are a lot of other states that don't do it this way. Agencies collect this money directly or sort of quasi-directly, right? What does not happen with this money is that it does not go through the legislature. And look, you might despise the legislature, right? I know I saw some public opinion poll numbers the other day, and they are not held in great high esteem at this point in Oklahoma history. But look, the legislature still has a job to do. Right? Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's not throw out the system because we're unhappy with some of the results or some of the people in office, right? The problem is that when agencies get their money directly, right, there's nobody to whom they are accountable for that money, and money is power. You've heard of the golden rule, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. I know that's not the real golden rule, but that is oftentimes the golden rule in government. That's why the power of the purse, the power of deciding where the money goes, is supposed to be very limited. Not just limited because it starts with the legislature, but it's supposed to be something that happens every year in Oklahoma, right? Some states it's every 2 years, but every state has a restriction on how long budgets can be, right? We don't let anybody write a 5-year budget, just push the go button and then walk away, right? We want recurring accountability. We want people who actually are responsible. And I submit to you, actually, that one of the reasons why people don't like the Oklahoma legislature, this might be counterintuitive, but I am sure that it's true. One of the reasons why people hold the Oklahoma State Legislature in low regard is that the Oklahoma State Legislature doesn't have a lot of the power that it's supposed to have, which makes it impotent, right? The state Senate, the state House, those guys are impotent when it comes to the power that they're supposed to have, the power of the purse, the power to turn to a state agency and say, look, you come, you answer our questions, you tell us how you spent that money, you tell us what's going on, right? When the Oklahoma legislature tries to do that, oftentimes they just get the cold shoulder because, and this is not to say that it's not their fault. One of the things that they've done in the past is create all of these quote-unquote unappropriated agencies that live off of fees that go directly to the agency, essentially directly to the agency. They don't flow through the state budget. And that means that the agencies are not accountable to anybody in the legislative branch. That means, think about it this way. The legislative branch is supposed to make laws, right? That's what they're supposed to do. And they pass laws all the time. Somebody was asking me a question about a law that was passed in 2015 and whether it was ever really implemented. It's supposed to create some efficiency. Basically said, this government agency over here has to do some things to make this program more efficient. And somebody was asking me, do you know if that ever happened? I said, I don't know if it ever happened. Probably never happened. Laws like that almost never take full effect in the great state of Oklahoma. Why is that? Because agencies, at the end of the day, a lot of agencies, especially a lot of the small ones, they're able to totally discount the legislature, right? And what do we hear from the Attorney General, right? Illegal but not criminal. If you violate a law like that, it may be illegal, but there's no sanction. And if there's no sanction, is it really illegal? I mean, ask yourself that question. If the legislature passes a law and says, the Oklahoma State Department of Health shall keep honest books, but there's no penalty, there's no sanction, there's no enforcement behind that law at all, is it really illegal but not criminal? Right? I mean, nominally, I guess it's illegal, but does it? Who cares? Right? This is the problem with government based on fees. One of the other problems is that, when you have less responsibility, you get irresponsibility, right? You actually get agencies, not just, it's not just that they don't care what the legislature has to say, it's that they actually are more likely to operate in a lawless manner. I was talking with a statewide official just the other day who was talking about some of the small boards and commissions that they just ignore the law. Or they at least ignore other agencies that are trying to find out what's going on. They ignore legislators who are looking into whether the law needs to be changed. Why do they do that? They get all their revenue through fees. It comes in directly. They're responsible to no one. In many cases, these officials are not elected. In many cases, they're appointed for 9-year terms, so they're there, almost forever, right? I mean, in politics, 9 years is forever, right? No elected official serves longer than 4 years in the great state of Oklahoma, except our U.S. senators serve for 6 years, right? I mean, that's a lifetime. That's crazy. What about federal money? What's the problem with federal money? It's sort of the same thing, right? It subverts the legislature. It subverts the state legislature. But it also, here's what happens with a lot of this federal funding, and this is the problem at the federal and the state level, is that Congress hands out money to federal bureaucracies, and then the federal bureaucracies get to decide what to do with it. Congress says, we want you to spend this amount of money on programs that make people healthier, and this amount of money on programs that do something, that educate kids or whatever. I mean, you go figure it out. This is what Congress says to the agencies. And this is why it's exciting to me, by the way, total digression here, but the U.S. Supreme Court is finally actually turning to Congress and saying, you're supposed to make the law. And if you're supposed to make the law, that means you actually have to write laws that are specific enough that you're not just handing your power over to the executive branch. You're not just shifting constitutional power that belongs in the Article 1 branch to the Article 2 branch. Because why? Because that's unconstitutional, which is another word for illegal. Right? So this is a good thing. But what happens today is these federal bureaucracies wind up having all of this discretionary authority when it comes to not millions, not tens of millions, not hundreds of millions, right? Billions of dollars. At the discretion of people who are not elected, people who mostly aren't even appointed, right? They were hired at some point in years past by some appointed official or somebody who was appointed by, right? The chain is so attenuated, there's no election that has determined really where a lot of this power goes, right? This power is inherent in these federal bureaucracies. They work directly with state bureaucracies. And the state bureaucracies maybe make promises to the federal bureaucracies, right? They work back and forth. The state bureaucracies get the money. Who do they wind up beholden to, right? Not your state elected officials, not even your federal elected officials. They wind up beholden to unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. This is the most backward, foolish, destructive way to run government, right? Anybody who understands the basic constitutional design of 3 branches of power and the people electing representatives who have short terms, who come from small-ish districts, right, to actually have the power of the purse, the power of taxing and spending, because they most closely represent us, right? Anybody who understands any of that and why that's supposed to be a good thing, right, we ought to look at the way this system works and say, this is crazy, right? This is not just accidentally subverting that system, it's intentionally subverting that system and shifting power away from we the people to unelected bureaucrats who almost entirely operate behind the scenes, right? These people do not operate, by the way, under the Open Public Meetings Act, right? They operate in their own offices, in state and federal office buildings, making decisions that affect where billions and billions of our federal tax dollars go, and millions and tens of millions, and yes, even hundreds of millions of our state dollars go, fees and taxes, right? And this is what we see at the state health department. This is, if you go and you read the whole report, it has to do with mostly federal money, also fee money, though also money collected for things like birth certificates, right? It was those 2 pots of money, not just a computer system, right? Those 2 pots of money, very similar to the way other state government agencies in Oklahoma operate, right? Those pots of money allowed them to operate in a way that was dishonest, to operate in a way that disregarded the law, disregarded basic ethical practices of bookkeeping and running any large organization, right? Allowed them to be irresponsible. And again, this is endemic across Oklahoma government. How do we solve it? What's the solution? The starting point is, right? Because I can give you big pie in the sky things that ought to happen, right? And I mean, we ought to stop sending so much money to Washington, D.C. just in hopes that we get it back. That's an absurdity, right? But that's a big picture problem. That's a long-term solution. What do we do in the short run? In the short run, we run all the money through the state legislature, right? This is the solution to a lot of problems, is to run all of the money through the state budget, right? Especially federal money. Did you know that in other states, the state budget actually includes federal money, and the state budget can say things about federal money. It can be, you know, we'll take this federal money, but it's going to be spent on this and not that. They might direct state agencies how to use it, how to account for it, and at the end of the day, they understand in many other states, it's all money being spent by these state agencies, right? If the state health department is spending a mix of federal and state funds, right? Well, if they get a federal dollar to do program X, then they obviously need one less state dollar to do project X, right? You can only write a rational budget if you put all of this together. Otherwise, you're leaving it all to the agency. Otherwise, it's a system of trust with no verify and with no power for the state legislature to actually exercise the duty of oversight as the money is being spent, right? This is the short-term solution. Change the way we write the state budget in Oklahoma. Change how we do state budgeting. Rein in, we should do the same thing with fees, right? There's no reason for agencies to be living off of fees. This is something that legislatures have done over time to pretend like they're conservative when they're not, frankly, right? Well, we're going to cut taxes, but then you agency over there, you raise fees. And if anybody notices, we'll complain and we'll say it's your fault. But we're going to cut taxes over here and let you raise fees over there. And at the end of the day, state government's still spending the same amount of money or more, right? It's just that they're hiding more and more and more of the revenue in things other than the obvious taxes that we sort of understand and have big public conversations about. Fee-based government, by the way, is not really conservative government, right? If government can operate, this is my last digression, but this is one of my favorite digressions because, frankly, a lot of my conservative friends have never thought about it this way. If some state agency can actually operate off of fees, can actually operate like a real business, right? Why is government doing that in the first place? The idea of government is that there are certain things that we actually need to do all together, and if we need to do them all together, we should all pay for them, right? Through taxes. We shouldn't try to, you know, parcel that out through fees, user pay government. There are certain areas where that might make sense, right? A gas tax, right, might make sense because it's really tightly tied. If you collect the money in gasoline taxes and then you spend the money actually on roads and not on bike lanes, right, that makes some sense. It's proportional. People are actually paying for things that they're directly using, I guess, right? I guess that makes sense. Right, but the idea that we're just going to hide government revenue in fees and that we're going to pretend like we can have government on the cheap that way, I think it produces bad government. I think the health department is an example of that, just like it's an example of the perversion that oftentimes comes along with these huge amounts of federal funding and the way that shifts power away from legislators and ultimately away from we the people. I'm Trent England. Thanks for listening. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about some of the criminal laws that really were implicated by what happened at the health department. I am not going to let them, I don't want to let them get away with this idea that it was illegal but not criminal. I think that criminal laws were violated. I think that people should at least be investigated, probably prosecuted for violating some of these criminal laws, even if they're just misdemeanors, right? Because frankly, this would help to expose more of what happened to the public, force more of these facts out into daylight. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. I think the reason why the prosecutions are not being pursued at this point is actually what I just said, that it would bring more sunlight to what actually happened at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. That's my suspicion. I'm Trent England. Thanks for watching one more day. Hope you'll tune in tomorrow. Remember, you can find us. We are on YouTube. We're on Facebook, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and the whole show archive at ocpathink.org. Thanks for watching.